Tonight, followed by headliners.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
we're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon, it is 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. Now, this show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's comedian Leo Curse. I say comedian very lightly.
I'm a comedian.
Ish. And broadcaster and director of Car 26, Lois Perry. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. I'm Ray Addison. It's coming up to 1 minute past 4. Here's the latest from the GB Newsroom. The Home Office has told the High Court another 2 asylum seekers will have their deportation to Rwanda cancelled. That brings the total to 5. Almost 100 legal challenges have been made against the government's policy, with lawyers arguing that Rwanda is not safe. The Prime Minister says he still hopes the first flight will go ahead next week as planned. However, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says it's the wrong approach.
The government's Rwanda scheme is a chaotic diversion, not thought through scheme which isn't going to solve the problems. Of course we don't want people making that dangerous crossing. Of course we want to clamp down on the people smugglers. The way to do that is to have a proper plan with the French authorities and a proper plan for upstream operations to intercept these groups before they even arrive on the north coast of France.
Staying with the Labour leader, and Sir Keir Starmer has confirmed that his party will vote against the government's plan to override elements of the Northern Ireland Protocol when it's brought to the Commons on Monday. After meeting with political leaders in Northern Ireland, Sir Keir Starmer says he believes the deadlock over power sharing can be resolved, but through negotiation. The DUP is refusing to form an executive in protest against the protocol. Boris Johnson has ordered ministers to do everything in their power to secure the release of 2 British men sentenced to death in Ukraine's separatist region of Donetsk. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were found guilty of mercenary activities by a court there. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has described the verdict as a sham and raised it with her Ukrainian counterpart. Human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell told GB News the men are prisoners of war and should be given immunity under the Geneva Conventions.
There's no evidence that we've heard of that either of these men have committed any war crime. They have not killed civilians. They have not attacked civilian targets like hospitals or churches or other places, protected places under the Geneva Convention. So the charges have no substance. And it's very clear that Russia is using their case in a bid to put pressure on Western authorities.
Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary has secretly visited President Zelensky to discuss sending further military support to Ukraine. The Ministry of Defence says that Ben Wallace's unannounced trip to Kyiv is a show of continued support. It comes as UK military intelligence show that medical infrastructure in the city of Mariupol is on the verge of collapsing with the risk of a major cholera outbreak. A manhunt is underway after a teenager was stabbed to death at his home in Manchester. The mother of the 14-year-old boy was also treated for serious injuries and is now in a stable condition in hospital. Police have described the attack, which happened in Miles Platting, as ferocious. They're looking for an Asian man in his 40s who was known to the victims. They've warned the public not to approach him. Transport for London and First Group are expected to admit failings over the Croydon tram crash. 7 passengers died and 51 were injured when a tram derailed in South London in 2016. TfL and the tram owner are accused of health and safety failings that caused the incident. Transport for London says a guilty plea will enable court proceedings to, quote, come to a conclusion as promptly as possible. MPs have criticised the government's plan to burn £4 billion worth of unusable personal protective equipment. The Department of Health and Social Care has been accused of wasting 75% of the £12 billion it spent on PPE during the first year of the pandemic. The Public Accounts Committee wants the government to clarify its plans for the equipment, including expected costs to the Treasury and the environment. 14,000 new school places will be created as part of the government's levelling up plans. Up to 75 new free schools and sixth forms will open in 55 areas. The first is expected to open in September 2025. School Standards Minister Robin Walker told GBNews supporting younger generations is a priority.
We need to be levelling up across the country, and that's why I think the targeting of the support for schools that I'm announcing today is really important. We've got these 55 education investment areas. We want to prioritise those for new schools, so that actually areas where perhaps children haven't had the opportunity to progress post-16 previously can have that gap filled. Have that opportunity to go as far as they can in their education and perhaps to go on to university, perhaps to take our new T-levels so that they can have the best chances in the workplace.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens. Now let's get back to Nana Akua.
So it's just gone 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, do you remember during the pandemic when we were all urged to stay at home, save lives? I mean, cast your mind back to this.
So we are saying, don't go to work, go to work. Don't take public transport, go to work, don't go to work. Stay indoors. If you can work from home, go to work. Don't go to work. Go outside, don't go outside. And then we will or won't, something or other.
Sorry, wrong one.
We said that you should work from home if you can and only go to work if you must. We now need to stress that anyone who can't work from home, for instance, those in construction or manufacturing, should be actively encouraged to go to work, and we want it to be safe for you to get to work.
I prefer Matt Lucas's version. I mean, the message basically was stay at home, which most of us dutifully did, and those who were employed and couldn't go to work stayed at home and were paid to do so at the taxpayer's expense. Furlough, remember that. Public transport, so buses, tubes and trains, ran a skeleton service whilst other public services like nurses and doctors, in fact most of the NHS, teachers and police worked flat out. And as we stumbled out of the pandemic in March this year, after coming through a winter of train disruption caused by COVID, Nobody really wanted to go back to the office, but those who did were met by tube strikes. That's when the news came that rail fares in England and Wales were to rise by 3.8%, the biggest leap in almost a decade to recoup the cost of the pandemic. Now, Frances O'Grady, the Trade Union and Congress and General Manager, she said, at a time when pay is being eclipsed by the rising cost of living, the last thing that commuters need is more expensive rail fares. She then went on to say, it is vital that our rail system recovers the passengers it lost at the start of the pandemic, especially if we want to keep our climate commuters. Another rise in rail fares will hit commuters and make it harder for city centres to bounce back. Well, you know what I'm saying. Obviously, I didn't read it properly, but you can read it yourselves. But back then, they cared. Fast forward a few months later, and they're at it again. This time, the RMT, the Union for Rail, Maritime and Transport, that represents many railway workers, a third of whom earn over 50 grand per year, they're planning a series of strikes over pay. Despite the fact that we are in a huge cost of living crisis, as Francis so politely pointed out, and that numbers taking public transport are dwindling, and that 70% of these rail workers earn above the average wage, and despite the fact that taxpayers bailed out the railways to the tune of £16 billion, a series of one-day strikes have been planned, including days either side of the Glastonbury weekend. Guess what they're asking? For more money. I want to laugh out loud. So let's see how much they actually earn. Well, the latest figures from the Department of Transport show that the average railway worker earns £44,000. That is 70% above the national average of £26,000. Let's compare this to the average wage of nurses at £31,000. That's what nurses earn. Teachers, they earn an average of £37,000. And care workers, a measly £17,000. And the police, who couldn't strike, are not allowed to strike, they earn an average of £42,000. All of whom worked tirelessly throughout the pandemic, their taxes contributing to the burden that is now furlough, the very thing that supported many transport workers who are now planning to strike. Now, Union Chief Mike Lynch said, railway workers have been treated appallingly, and despite our best efforts in negotiations, the rail industry, with the support of the government, has failed to take their concerns seriously. She went on to say, we have a cost of living crisis, and it is unacceptable for railway workers to either lose their jobs or face another year of a pay freeze when inflation is at 11.1% and rising. Our union will now embark on a sustained campaign of industrial action, which will shut down the railway system. Great. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps accused the RMT of jumping the gun. It's more like trying to pull off a great train robbery, but if they're not careful, they'll run out of track. Right, before I take my teeth out and get stuck into the debate... Actually, no, I have recently had a little crown next to my root canal, so, you know, that's interesting. I can't quite feel that side of my mouth yet, but I haven't been able to chew on it for 2 years. Let's move on. But before we get started, let's see what else is coming up today. On Friday Focus at 5, we'll be taking a look at media bias. Now, is the mainstream media almost so-called hysterical anti-Boris Johnson obsession a bid to oust him, or is it fair reporting of facts? Some of Britain's most watched media have been accused of being overcritical of the Prime Minister. So what do you think? Have they? For our Great British debate, I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? The Prime Minister announced yesterday's ways to help more people get on the housing ladder, including encouraging people in social housing to buy their homes under a right-to-buy scheme, as well as allowing those on universal credit to get on the housing ladder. So I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? And at the end of the hour, I'll be joined by an oncologist to talk about the latest breakthrough in cancer treatment. Now, this is incredible. Cancer disappeared in every patient during experimental immunotherapy treatment. It was a trial that they did. But could this be the breakthrough that we've been looking for? Stay tuned. That is coming up towards the end of the hour. Tell me everything, all your thoughts. We're discussing lots of things. You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, let's get started. Let's welcome again to my panel comedian Leo Kearse, also broadcaster and director of Car 26, Lois Perry. Right, so welcome, Lois. Nice to see you on a Friday.
Lovely to see you too.
And you, Leo, you're not normally here on a Friday either.
No, I'm not. I can't do tomorrow, so I'm doing today instead.
Well,
and Nana, can I just say, I'm surprised that dentist didn't put that crown on your head.
Oh, really?
Oh,
so
flattery will get him everywhere, won't it?
Bravo!
You thought he'd met me, didn't you, in the green room?
I think I've just seen you on GBNews.
Oh, well, there you go.
Yeah. All right. Enough of that. I'm talking now. Listen, so Leo, I'm going to start with you then. What do you make of this whole... They want more money.
Yeah.
They've got a good average wage, right? Most people, a lot of people watching would think that's a good wage. I think that's a good wage.
Yep.
They were supported through the pandemic.
Everybody wants more money, but I mean, the taxpayer really bailed them out during the pandemic when rail services weren't running. I think it was £16 billion,
right.
which is a lot of money. I mean, the windfall tax on North Sea oil is just going to raise £5 billion. So I mean, this is this could really make a difference in the government's coffers. So the taxpayer paid all that money to keep the rail services going, make sure they didn't get fired. And now that we've come out of the pandemic, rail is still not back up at its normal rate. So ticket sales are 25% below. So obviously we need to make savings somewhere, and instead of helping us make the savings, they're going on strike and demanding more money and causing problems for the economy just when we're trying to recover, and causing problems for all the people who bailed them out. I think it's ridiculous. I think we should replace them with robots as soon as possible.
Well, we may well be doing that. That's the way it's going. And also, a lot of people work from home, and now obviously every time they strike, they're advised to work from home, and we're really practiced at that now. Lois.
Yeah, they're really shooting themselves in the foot for the reason that you just said. You know, people will eventually just think, OK, it's too expensive to go by train now, so we will work from home, and, you know, they'll be completely shooked. But, you know, we're all in this together. Inflation is hitting absolutely everybody, and why should they be any different, you know? And at a time when the government are trying to push us out of our cars and onto public transport, there is a part of me that wonders whether they're flexing their muscles a little bit and thinking, we get some power here, because if everyone's having to use public transport, we hold the government to ransom. We're back to the 70s. We're back to, the summer of discontent, the old winter of discontent.
But yeah, I mean, you make a good point as well, obviously holding the government to ransom, which is dangerous, especially when we're planning to go into this whole thing and push for public transport. So what do you make of the potential of where maybe they will not, if they do strike, they have to run a certain service? So, you know, because there was that comment that was made that we may well put that in place so that they can strike, but they must ensure that services are still running.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's like what you said with the police. The police don't get an option not to strike. So, yeah, maybe a skeleton service should run, but I don't think they should be striking at all. We are all in this together, you know, and it's... No, it's not on, really. It's a bit selfish, really.
Well, everyone's selfish. I mean, they would argue that the paying conditions, people are going to be...
But their paying conditions are quite good, as you said.
Well, they are.
Yeah.
They would argue that, and they'd probably argue that the fact that we're planning to get rid of some of the staff, because obviously slim down the staffing structure, because some people will have to go out of work, because, frankly, the services isn't being used as much.
Yeah.
People would argue that they're arguing that, actually, they don't want that. They're not being treated fair.
Well, they striked when it was going to be private. Now they're striking, now it's going back into public ownership. When are they happy? They just don't like the status quo, do they?
Yeah. No, I mean, we've got record low unemployment in this country. I don't think unemployment's been this low in decades. It's at, I think, 3.6 or 3.7%. So it's not as if, you know, if you leave your job with the train company, and if they are so underpaid, surely whatever job they get will be a step up. You know, so you could go into the job market, find another job very easily. You'll have your severance package, or, you know, because they always start with these things. They start with voluntary unemployment. I took voluntary unemployment once. It was fantastic. Voluntary redundancy. Got paid like 10 grand to not go to work. Got 3 months' salary. It was brilliant time. And got another job very, very easily. So, you know, people shouldn't be afraid of you know, leaving the job that, you know, that is apparently so underpaid. But I really think we're going to see more industrial action, because the low unemployment rate means that it's hard to fill positions. So workers know that they've got more leverage now.
Well, they might have more leverage, but where do they think the money's going to come from? Because that actually...
the magic money tree.
Well, actually, in March, the fares went up by the largest percentage they've been, you know, for the last 10 years, right? So 9 years, in fact. So fares have already gone up. We, the British public, are going to be paying for that increase. And then they are expecting more money again, and somehow that money, somewhere the money's got to balance. And apparently, Grant Shapps was basically saying that, you know, we haven't really had proper discussions. They've already announced the strike dates.
It's disgraceful. Where do they think the money's going to come from? I mean, we can't keep printing money like we have during COVID. Our net zero policies, you know what I think about that, are just causing absolute nightmarish energy cost rises across the board, which again is pushing up inflation because that affects absolutely everything. We will run out of money eventually, but I don't think these guys care too much about that, do they? As long as they're all right.
We can make some more, but what they don't understand is when you make some more, that
you have to borrow.
Well, it causes inflation. You
Absolutely.
Either pump quantitative easing, pump money into the economy, but then it deflates the value of the money, which therefore inflates the price of everything else. So
that's right.
It's up to them. If they genuinely think that this is a wise move, then it just creates more inflation, in which case, even if they are paid more, it won't keep up with inflation.
Yeah, the wages go up, but then so does the cost of everything else.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
It's prices rising with wages lagging behind, and that's the definition of inflation.
Yeah, and I think we need to rebalance the rail system and our entire transport system because train prices are really expensive. It's cheaper for me to drive to shows. If I've got a gig in the Midlands or whatever, I drive there instead of getting the train because it works out cheaper, even with petrol at this price. And then you get in the train, if you do get the train, and it's empty. So, what's going on there? And also they make it so difficult. Like, I missed the train going up to Glasgow, so I went to get on the next one, and the guy wouldn't let me on because my ticket was for this time and all the rest of it. Like, come on, I've given you 150 quid. Well, let me on the train.
Well, they've got HS2 coming as well, and maybe they should think about scrapping that. Listen, if you just joined us, welcome on board. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Still to come, the Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? Send me your thoughts. Do you own your own home? You can email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell me your thoughts, or why not tweet us at GBNews. And there is a poll up right now asking that very question. Should everyone have the right to own their own home? Cast your vote now. We'll be back in a minute.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's fast approaching 22 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are, of course, the People's Channel, and I'm Nana Akua. Right now, before the break, I was asking a few bits and pieces, and we were looking at, we're talking about the unions and the fact that the RMT and that everyone's asking for more money, and we'll find out what you've been saying about it. So let's see, what have you guys been saying about the thoughts and the monologue? In this hour, I was asking as well, should everyone have the right to own their own home? As ever, your thoughts, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet me at gbnews. Right. The Great British Debate this hour, I said, should everyone have the right to own their own home? Boris Johnson announced yesterday that he wants everybody to give him the chance to own their own home. as part of his speech in Blackpool. He laid out plans for those benefits to also be able to become homeowners under Benefits to Bricks pledge. He also said that he wanted to extend a scheme to allow tenants to buy their homes. His critics said that these schemes won't work and would make the housing crisis worse. But the Prime Minister hit back by saying that each social housing property sold would be replaced in one-for-one scheme. He also said that people receiving universal credit will go to choose whether to spend their benefits on rent or put them towards a mortgage. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? I'm joined now by property expert Julie Ford. Julie, right, there's a whole thing, isn't it? Boris has come up with this wonderful idea. Talk to me about the ideas that Boris has put forward, because that's the thing. He's saying that if you've got a right to buy, I mean, what is it? Just break it down for me.
So basically what Boris is explaining to everybody is that we all have the right to own our own home. Now, I agree with that, of course we do, but it's how we do that that's really important. Now, the reason why most people rent is because they can't afford to buy. So rather than breaking down into social housing and trying to fix the problem short term, what we really should be looking at is the mortgage issues. The criteria for people to get mortgages is horrendous at the moment, and I genuinely don't know how that's going to work with people on benefits as well as people that are working.
OK, but let's go back to it. So what is he saying? So the right to buy, what's he saying about that?
He's saying that anybody that's in social housing has got the right to buy the property that they're living in.
But don't they have that right anyway?
They do if they are local authority. Now, that was brought in by Margaret Thatcher. Right. So that's something that she brought in a long time ago, and that actually got rid of an awful lot of housing stock for the local authorities. Now, that's never happened for the housing associations before. They've never been in a position where they've had to sell their stock off before, like they're being asked now. What they have been able to do, and this is exclusive to housing associations, is shared ownership. So a tenant living in a housing association property at the moment does have the opportunity for shared ownership with some of the schemes. So if you can buy a property and rent at the same time, you're paying towards your mortgage as well as paying towards your rent.
Interesting. OK, so basically the scheme the scheme would help people if it's a council, if it's a
housing association.
Housing association.
Yeah.
And those who it's not a house association may have a right to a share of ownership.
That's right, yeah.
So basically, either one of those, the shared ownership, people could buy the house anyway. So that doesn't... And the other one, could they buy the house anyway, in any case?
Yeah, so local authority, which is council, have always had the...
So you can do that anyway. So what he said doesn't really have any value at all, because those people could still buy houses.
They could if there's the shared ownership scheme with the housing associations, which most of them have. But what I think Boris is saying, he's actually giving the housing association tenants that don't have the shared ownership scheme at the moment the option to buy the properties they're living in.
So, but that's quite a small portion of people, because surely the real problem is private landlords. You know, so if you're in a private rented home and you've been paying your rent just religiously for 3 years, and then you want to try and get a mortgage, that payment, the fact that you've made that religious payment, is not taken into account. So those people in shared ownerships and those and those other homes will still have those homes, and they can pass them on, can they, to other people as well?
In certain circumstances, yes, depending on the type of tenancy they've got, some people will be able to pass their properties on, which is called succession, and that means that property from a housing association could be out of circulation for quite, you know, some considerable years, because one family is progressing it through. So it's not actually available for anybody else to move into.
Oh, I see. So still the people in private rented accommodation are not being helped, and they're the bulk of the people. Let me just bring in Richard Blanco. He's from the Landlords Association, the National Residential Landlords Association. OK, so what do you make of his scheme? Because, you know, the landlords, the idea, whilst it does help people who are already being helped in terms of housing, it doesn't really do much for the private renters, and surely that's the bulk of people.
Yes, I mean, I think the government's got a little bit of a dogmatic obsession with home ownership, and I'd like to see it facilitating all of the tenures. So we need to build more homes, yes, for private ownership, but we also need to build more council homes for council renting and for housing associations to rent, and we need to make the environment less hostile, really, for landlords, so that landlords are still able to buy and rent properties, which people are desperate for. I mean, at the moment, there's a real shortage in supply of privately rented properties, and that's partly because landlords are starting to sell up because of unfavourable taxation.
Because I do find that a lot of the rhetoric that you hear is often saying, oh, the landlord is this, the landlord is that. But I just don't feel that that's actually a fair reflection. Are you finding that landlords are awful? You always hear landlords are dodgy and this and that. But surely the majority of landlords are accidental landlords, and the majority are actually quite good, aren't they?
You're absolutely right. The majority of landlords own between 1 and 4 properties. Over 80% of tenants say they're happy or very happy with their accommodation in the private rented sector. And the English Housing Survey tells us that on average, tenants stay for 4 years or more. So the idea that they're being evicted every 6 months and so on is not true. Big problem we have, and I think you hit the nail on the head, is that, you know, no one ever writes to their MP or goes to their local councillor to tell them how wonderful their landlord is or how happy they are with their rented accommodation. We only ever hear about the bad stuff, and it's important that we tell those really positive stories that we need. The private rented sector is starting to shrink for the first time in a long time, and that's because the government are bringing in so much regulation and the taxation of landlords is unfair, and we're going to have a real problem in the years to come if the private rented sector starts to shrink.
So the government's idea that everyone should have the right to own their own home, it's sort of a Mrs Thatcher policy that she sold off the council houses, which actually caused the problem initially. Do you think that is a realistic expectation, and that everyone, I mean, it sounds a bit pie in the sky, I don't think everyone will be able to, but do you think that's a realistic comment and expectation?
Well, again, I think you've hit the nail on the head that, you know, the sell-off of all of those council houses by Thatcher without replacing them, that's the key thing, is a key cause of the housing crisis now. I agree with what Julie's saying about people's right to buy. I think it's important that we encourage people to buy if that's what they want, but we shouldn't get obsessed with it and prioritise it over other types of tenure.
What about, now, Julie, you touched on the banks, because for me, I remember the subprime fiasco many years ago. I did a little programme on Panorama about it, and it really, you know, I was actually chairing a residents committee at the time, and you know, we were trying to sort of get rid of the leasing company, the company that were looking after the management of the building, and the big problem was this subprime fiasco, the fact that banks had lent money to people who really couldn't afford to do it, and then in the end it collapsed the market, and then the banks lost trust in actually investing in people. And there seems to be a problem now that they're not prepared, even though they were bailed out by us, the taxpayer, they don't seem to be prepared to put their hand in the pocket and actually, or make this work for the average person on the street.
Absolutely, you are spot on there. And I think that is most of people's problems, not being able to get on the property ladder to start with. They can't meet the criteria for the mortgage companies. And also, you've got to think that not everybody wants to own their own home either. There are some private rented tenants and social tenants that actually the transient lifestyle suits them. You know, they also may not have the finances to repair the property when the boiler goes wrong or something like that. So renting works. So I think a one-size-fits-all doesn't work for society today. It doesn't anyway. But absolutely, the mortgage side of things is awful. As you spoke about earlier, you know, people that are paying their rent religiously every month on time, that's not being taken into consideration when they're going to buy a mortgage.
I see you nodding, Richard. Why?
Yes, well, I mean, there is a scheme at the moment where some credit files will contain information about rental payments that renters have made. But, you know, mortgage affordability generally doesn't take account of how much rent renters may have paid for many, many years. And I think that's wrong, because very often they'd probably be paying less if they had a mortgage than they are if they've, and what they're paying on rent. So somehow the system needs to take account of that, I think.
I think, yeah, would if, OK, so the government want to help people buy their own homes, and obviously I think he was talking about a 4-in-1, so replacing one home to every 4 that are bought up or something like that. Would a scheme then that actually enables people, if they're renting, to buy a home be much more amenable? Because actually these people probably would like to buy their own homes and they could afford to do it. But do you think the government actually looking in the wrong place here, and that actually they should be focusing on the private renters? Because the people in housing benefit and those kind of homes, they're already being catered for and they could potentially buy, and there are schemes that enable them. But it's the private renters and they form a larger percentage. Do you think the government should be looking there?
Yeah, I do, absolutely. And I think it's probably more obvious for the private rented sector to have more support, because people in the private rented sector are predominantly the ones trying to save up for a deposit to get their foot on the ladder for the first time. But I think the government are looking in the wrong place, as always. They're looking for a quick fix, the sticking plaster legislation that's just going to fix the problem and not really worry about what's going to happen in the future and the knock-on effect. Because if housing association tenants are buying up the properties at, let's say, 70% less than they would have gone on the market for, and then, although Boris is saying he's going to replace those, they're not going to... How quick is he going to build these properties to replace? And the problem is these housing associations are going to run out of stock.
Yeah, I mean, the government wants Generation Rent to become Generation Buy, and it's had various schemes like Help to Buy to do that. But, you know, it's set a target of 300,000 new homes in England every year, and a report for the NRLA by Capital Economics shows that the government is just not going to manage to achieve that for various reasons, because mortgage interest rates are going up, because of planning constraints and so on. We're actually going to need 225,000 more privately rented properties every year in the next few years. So we need the government to be much more open-minded and think much more broadly across all the tenures, and not just try and push people into buying homes, but you know, make sure there are going to be enough privately rented ones too.
Well, they've got a lot of job on their hands. So should everyone have the right then to own their own homes? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely, yes. But it's not everyone wants to own their own home, and not everybody needs to.
And of course, Julie, you think they should?
Yeah, everyone's got the right, but as Richard said, it's their choice.
It's their choice, it's their choice. And also the banks as well, if they could just be slightly more, just a little bit more lenient, it would help people out a bit. Well, thank you so much to Julie Ford and also Richard Bianco, is that right? Lovely, lovely. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, we'll continue with the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? You'll hear from the thoughts of my panel, comedian Leo Kearse and also broadcaster and director of Car 26, Lois Perry. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. It's 33 minutes past 4. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Home Office has told the High Court another 2 asylum seekers will have their deportation to Rwanda cancelled. That brings the total to 5. Almost 100 legal challenges have been made against the government's policy, with lawyers arguing that Rwanda is not safe. The Prime Minister says he still hopes the first flight will go ahead next week as planned. The Labour leader has confirmed his party will vote against the government's plan to override elements of the Northern Ireland Protocol when it's brought to the Commons on Monday. After meeting with political leaders in Northern Ireland, Sir Keir Starmer said that new legislation is the wrong approach and the deadlock over power sharing can be resolved through negotiation. Boris Johnson has ordered ministers to do everything in their power to secure the release of 2 British men sentenced to death in Ukraine's separatist region of Donetsk. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were found guilty of, quote, mercenary activities. Meanwhile, the Defence Secretary has secretly visited President Zelensky in Kyiv to discuss sending further military support to Ukraine and to show continued support. It follows a warning from UK intelligence that Mariupol is at risk of a major cholera outbreak as medical services are near collapse. And 2 people have been jailed after a 10-year-old boy was mauled to death by an American bully dog called Beast. Jack Liz was attacked at a friend's house in Pentwyn, South Wales in November last year. 19-year-old Brandon Hayden has been jailed for 4.5 years after pleading guilty to owning the dog. 29-year-old Amy Salter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for being in charge of an out-of-control animal. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Back to Nana Akua in just a moment.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So it's coming up to 38 minutes after 4 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. You can even find us on YouTube and watch the show streaming live and catch up via the GB News app. I'm Nana Akua. Now, at the very beginning, at the top of the end of the show, we're talking about the fact that rail workers are planning to strike. Let's see what you've been saying. Starting with the issue on the strike. 55k for driving. This is from Brian. Brian says 55k for driving a train with one hand. Think of the wages they would want if they had to use both. One viewer says, my partner works on the railway. He worked all the way through COVID and is not striking. It's all the ones that were furloughed that are complaining. They were hard done by. They thought they were, honestly, seriously. And we're talking about the government's new housing policy because we're discussing that. Ed says, yes, absolutely, but not using taxpayers' money, because I asked whether you think that people should be allowed to, everyone should own their own home. They shouldn't use taxpayers' money to do it with, and every home bought to be replaced with a new home being built a similar size. David says all citizens should have the right to buy a home, but none should have the right to insist one is given. And then Harley says, no, it's not their home. Someone else owns it. But keep those thoughts coming as we go into our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? Boris Johnson announced yesterday that everyone should be able to do this. As part of his speech, he laid out plans for those on benefits to be able to become homeowners under a Benefits to Bricks pledge. He also said that he wanted to extend a scheme to allow social tenants to buy their homes. His critics say that these proposals won't work and would make the housing crisis a lot worse. But Prime Minister Boris Johnson hit back. He said that for each social housing property sold, another would be built. He also said that people receiving universal credit would get to choose whether to spend their benefits on rent or put them towards a mortgage. Interesting stuff. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? Well, let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by comedian Leo Kearse and also broadcaster and director of Car 26, Lois Perry. Right, so Lois, should everyone have the right to own their own home in your view?
Well, it's not illegal to own your own home, is it? You know, in this country, anyone can. But I get what you're saying. You know, should people be helped who wouldn't ordinarily be able to do so?
Yeah, what I'm saying is, well, it does. Well, actually, what you said there does break it down. Do people actually have the right to own their own home? Because that then puts it in a position where you think, well, hang on, you don't have to be able to own your own home.
No.
Why is he making it so that everyone can?
Well, because it's a vote winner, it makes him sound more Thatcherite. But the problem that we've got at the moment is that there's not enough homes and we need 1 million more homes. And I was talking to a friend of mine, actually, about some legislation that he thinks that should go through. And during the Olympics, they actually did a thing called the Olympic Act, which was in 2005, whereby they were absolutely able to cut through all existing planning regulations so that they could do whatever it took, basically, to get the Olympics to happen. And why couldn't we do something like that now? Because everyone's saying, oh, we need more homes and we need this and we need that. But actually, with all the NIMBYism and everything that's going on, it's the planning regulations that are causing all the problems. So if we had an equivalent to the Olympic Act, but to get 1 million homes built, then I believe Boris Johnson that for every social housing property that gets sold, that he build another one. At the moment, I don't, because it's so onerous, the legislation, that it just basically wouldn't happen. I also don't think they should be selling social housing and council housing. I think it's immoral,
well,
actually.
Also, the benefits, the money that they get in the benefits, they could either choose to save up for deposits. So our taxpayers' money, some of us, for me, I had to save my own money. It was difficult. It was a lot easier because my first house I bought in 2002 or something. So I was able to buy a 2-bedroom house for under £100,000 in London, unheard of. And the thing is, for me, I saved my money. I had to meet a criteria. I saved my money. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is. Part of it, I think, is great because it's going to give people who are on benefits a sort of a way out and a way into sort of aspirational home ownership. This is what happened in the 80s as well. I know a lot of families, a lot of people who were helped off the sort of cycle of benefits and dependency to owning equity and owning their own property, which was fantastic. But, I mean, it does seem a little bit unfair that, you know, in the UK at the moment, especially if you're in a major city, you can only afford to buy a house if you're either super rich. You can only afford to live there if you're super rich or if you're super poor. What about the people in the middle who are working and paying all the taxes?
See, that's the bit that... this is the bit that I find slightly a bit... it just feels a bit acidic when I think about it. I'm really happy to help and make sure that people can afford to buy their own home. But whether everyone should have the right to own their own home so that literally we make sure that everyone does, then it doesn't consider the people who've worked incredibly hard to earn their own stuff. And then when you get older, there's that care home thing where you end up selling most of what you've got to then pay for your care, which I find, again, quite really despicable. So what is the incentive for me as a person in the middle to even bother when I know I'm going to be helped?
Well, also, there's the point, who actually will own the home? Because if it's a government house or it's a social housing or a council property to start off with, then they're using benefits to pay the mortgage. Who owns it anyway? It's all semantics, isn't it? The whole thing, you know, on paper, oh, I'm a homeowner, but actually, you're not really.
Maybe it's a trick, so the government lets people feel like they've bought a house, but then when they take it back to pay for their care at the end, they were just borrowing the house.
That's the point, that's the point. And mortgage actually means death tax.
Yeah. Yes,
so basically tax you to death. And the fact is that I think that this is actually a trick, isn't it? Because you think that they've given you money to buy a house, but actually when you need to go into a care home, they'll take that right off you and use it to spend or sell it to pay for your care.
Absolutely, or it could be another kind of trick because we know that they're bringing all these net zero regulations. Sorry to keep going on about it. But the net zero regulations, you know, you have to do this and you have to do that to the property. Well, if it's technically owned by the person and not them, they'll be the one responsible for doing all the costs to bring it up to date. And the cladding, they'll get out of all of the cladding stuff, won't they?
I mean, that's another thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a scandal. I mean, that's just an absolute disgrace that the government actually expected people who bought a house in good faith to then pay for something that they've changed the regulations for years later. Yeah. I mean, that's just totally out of order. We'll talk about that as well. I think we'll probably do a piece on that tomorrow because I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, well, there's so much red tape around building, as you're talking about, around planning regulations and also the NIMBYism. You know, the real reason, you know, we've got all these well-meaning Guardian-reading lefties who, you know, want everybody to have a house.
They're not well-meaning.
Just not built next to theirs. They just want it. They don't want the view obstructed.
Well, that's the whole thing.
And that's not really fair on people who need to buy a house. We need to build at least 1 million new homes in this country, and there are places we could build them that aren't going to be. We could develop brownfield sites. We could develop old
only 2% is developed of the land in the country. So do you think that my policy then, emergency legislation like the Olympic Act, we should do it? What do you think?
Well, as long as it's not in
your backyard.
It's a bit like, I mean, there's this whole thing with the migrants in Rwanda, isn't it? It's been stopped by a load of legal issues and stuff, and a lot of these legal eagles we're paying, obviously, for the whole legal thing that's going on there, which I find abhorrent.
A lot of councils are paying their bills.
Well, exactly. So the fact is that the councils so-and-so are paying their bills, and these legal people who are the people who are probably very middle class, you wait when one of the migrant camps gets built right next to their place, they'll be the first ones.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
But anyway, ultimately, though, we're talking about owning our own home, and this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice, your opportunity to be on the show. Tell us what you really think about the topics we're discussing. Where should we go this hour? Should we go to what was once voted the most boring place in England, Hull? It isn't anymore, though. Let's have a chat to Simon Kelsey, who's a B&B owner. Simon, good to see you. Right. So, Simon, your thoughts on this? Should everybody actually have this right to own their own home? Should it be literally a thing that you really should be able to do?
Well, everyone does have a right to own their own home. I think this isn't really a policy of Boris's, though, because as your panel have said, you know, how do you pay for all sorts of things? If you're paying for benefits, then how are you going to get ahead with when you need a new boiler? How are you going to pay for all sorts of maintaining a house? I mean, I maintain a big house here and it costs a fortune. I think we are going for the wrong people. I don't think what Boris has got going here is a policy. I think it's just a soundbite in the long run to an election. I mean, I would love to see everyone owning their own house, but you need to be in work, you need to be able to save like we all did, and you're probably going after the wrong people. Social housing, council housing, there's always a need for that, and there always will be a need for it. So I think you should be maybe making the private landlords, the ones that aren't maintaining the properties, maybe go after them. And like I think one of your contributors just said, the people that are wanting to buy their own houses that are currently in rented are in private rented. So they're the ones that if they can pay rent, they should be paying a mortgage, not the people that are in social housing who probably want to rent and are happy doing that. When Boris says he's going to build houses to make up the ones that are sold, do you remember when he said there'll be a nuclear power station every year, or there'll be 50 million trees planted every year? He's just talking. This is not a thought-out policy.
Well, his art was in the right place, though, Wrigley. I mean, he's touched on something that needs to be addressed, but where maybe the solution isn't that appealing when you think it through. Simon, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for joining me. That's Simon Kelsey. He's a B&B owner. He's there in Hull. Right, let's see. Today I've been asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? So briefly to my panel, just tell me briefly, yes or no, they should, yes or no? You think yes?
Well, everybody's got the right, as you said.
But really and realistic, is it a realistic proposition?
Well, I think we just need to build more homes, not give away like homes that the government owns.
Don't give away homes. Right, so let's see what you've been saying. Stop giving them away. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your thoughts. Let's see what you had to say. Christian says, yes, if you work hard, save for a deposit and not expect taxpayers to provide you with it. Yeah, I'm with that. Anna says, I'd like to say yes, except I fear the reluctance to building more houses is because of the influx of economic migrants and them being housed first. That is an issue, isn't it? That a lot of these... I mean, because if you come to this country, they've got 30,000 people, in hotels and stuff. We're paying £5 million a day for that. And we haven't got enough homes to even...
Well, that's a drop in the ocean in the wider immigration. So we had, I think last year it was 1 million people, or the year before 1 million people, a new high for immigration.
Well, that's true, but I don't know whether that accounts for people who would have come here in the EU. I don't know whether we count.
Yeah, but they still got to live somewhere.
Well, yeah, but,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, but they're not
like
counted in the numbers when you're saying 1 million. I don't know whether they were counted in the numbers before, because if you added them and the people who were coming, it may have been a bigger number.
A human body that comes to this country has to live in a house.
Yeah, no, but I'm not questioning that. I'm just not questioning that. I'm just questioning the fact that you said 1 million, because it only counts people who come from other countries. Are we counting the people who came from the EU if you're comparing it? That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Right, let's see what Trevor says. Trevor says everyone does have the right to own a home if, of course, they can afford it. No one has the right to expect or to be gifted one. Do you know, that would have been a better question. Should everyone have the right to expect to own their own home? Let's see what the poll says on Twitter throughout the show. Should everyone have the right to own their own home? What do you think it says? How many?
I think it will say 74%
Lois?
no.
I think it'll be majority yes, actually.
What is that then?
Oh, I don't know, 62.
62. 57, turn the numbers round. Currently 57% of you say yes, so 43% of you say no, they shouldn't. And I'm sort of with those who say not really, everyone should be able to, but I don't think it should be a God-given sort of right. You need to save the money. I don't think it's fair for the taxpayer to sort of support you so that you can then afford to do it. And perhaps they should consider maybe helping out those who are currently renting. Right now, researchers, this is very, very exciting because researchers have come one step closer to finding a cure for cancer. Such an exciting discovery. Every patient, but bear in mind there are only 12 in this clinical trial, saw their cancer disappear after receiving an experimental immunotherapy treatment. Now, the trial involved patients with locally advanced rectal cancer, and it saw them given 6 months of treatment with the drug, and the cancer went into remission in all of the 12 patients and was then said to be undetectable through endoscopy, physical examinations and scans. So this is an incredible thing. I mean, let's not get too overexcited. There were only 12 in the trial, but it's still interesting nonetheless. I'm joined by Professor Angus Dalgleish, an oncologist at St George's Hospital in London. Well, I mean, this sounds incredible. Is it so amazing? And what was the trial? What was it that they took and how did it work?
Well, it is incredible, given that the response rate in colorectal cancer with immunotherapy has been hitherto quite low. But it all focuses on the fact that they do see some people who have very good responses, and they noted that they have certain gene mutations, and that these gene mutations make them very susceptible to this type of approach. So the two things about this trial that make it very fascinating, interesting, and why they got such a good result. The first is they used early disease and not late metastatic disease. So it was early local disease. The second was they selected everybody who went into this trial had that genetic abnormality, which made them very susceptible to it. So they very cleverly used two lines. They used a hyperselection and they used early disease. These are the two big differences. But we should not lose sight of the fact that this is a tremendous new way of approaching treating cancer. Get it early with a systemic immunotherapy if they have the relevant marker. My own work has been associated with making people who wouldn't normally respond by priming the immune system first. And in the same meeting as this, we published a paper showing if you prime with an immunotherapeutic modulator injection, we called it IMM 101, then the response rate to a similar type of therapy as these patients got nearly doubled without any added toxicity. So this has really opened up a new approach. We prime and select and then use treatments which we know have the capacity to completely eliminate the disease.
That's incredible. So basically, you look for certain markers that the person has. It needs to be early onset, and then you do something to the immune system. Is it like a boost or prepare it for the treatment beforehand? That's what you mean?
Yeah. Well, in this trial, the immune system drug they use is the same type of drug that we've used in melanoma and lung cancer. It basically takes the brakes off the immune system. Right. So all the prime cells will then attack the cancer, and many of them have seen the cancer. Cancer just learned to suppress the immune response. So it works like that. But the patients who don't normally respond have already got the resistances built up, and so they don't respond. So what I'm saying, you either select people who you know are already sensitive, or you make them sensitive by priming the immune system with other approaches. So taken together, these two do give great cause for optimism that we really will improve the cancer rate and response rate and survival in the future if we can actually get patients to GPs and hospitals to diagnose them earlier in the first place. Because at the moment, that is our big problem.
There is that. So basically, it basically identifies it, breaks down the blocks of the immune system, can see the cancer, so the immune system itself can then attack the cancer. It's very, very clever. Could this particular type of treatment go across other cancers? Because this one was the rectal cancer, but can it go for other cancers? And is this something that could be adapted? And you said early stage. What about, could it potentially be for later stages as well?
Yes, I mean, in melanoma, we started in late stage and we got responses, and now we are bringing it in earlier. With this type of cancer, the responses in late stage were very poor, so people thought, well, it doesn't respond. So the importance of this study is that bring the treatment forward earlier before it's had a chance to spread too far. And that is a great lesson which will extrapolate to other cancers. But we are now doing that with melanoma and lung cancer. Indeed, immunotherapy for lung cancer is used first up even a few years ago, it was chemotherapy if you couldn't operate. So things are really changing at a very fast pace and for the good. I think it's very encouraging indeed.
Could this potentially mean that you'd wipe out things like chemotherapy? Because a lot of the time chemotherapy sort of strips you of everything, and then you end up catching something that would eventually kill you, whereas, or it just basically strips your body of its power. I mean, does this replace it?
Well, in melanoma and lung cancer, it has replaced chemotherapy in the vast majority of cases. So it is very exciting. And here, with this small study, with the selected group, the disease is completely gone. So there's no need for chemotherapy. And prior to this type of treatment, these patients would have had chemotherapy to try and slow the tumour down and to make it smaller and easier to treat, perhaps surgically or radiotherapy. So the bottom bottom line is yes. But also, what we found in our researches is that not all chemotherapy is helpful because it actually kills cells. It is because it actually modifies the environment in which the tumour is growing. So it attacks cells which are feeding the tumour. And that's a fantastic way. It's like, starving an army by preventing the food from getting through. So some chemotherapy works like that, and that's a bit of a surprise. We thought it only killed the tumour cell. So we're starting to use some chemotherapies with this immunotherapy to enhance the response rate even more.
How clever. And is it expensive, though? Because that's often the stumbling block.
Well, I'm afraid all these immunotherapy drugs are incredibly expensive. I mean, I think embarrassingly so, because they're only essentially antibodies, and although antibodies were very expensive initially to produce, once you have all the technology up and running, they are relatively cheap. And I do think that the pricing of these things was agreed for things like advanced melanoma. The market's not very big, they must be very expensive. But now, even before this, there's over 23 different cancer types which this immunotherapy works on. So I don't believe that the prices of this can possibly be justified now that it's a treatment that can be helpful in all types of cancer, in all sorts of people. That does not strike me as being a rare condition for a high price.
And briefly, because we're running out of time, we've got about 30 seconds. How soon, if this treatment is working, would it be taken to market for other people to try and use it?
I think it will be taken. It will be very quick, very fast tracked. So they will want to do a bigger study, but the drug is well, the approach is well established and in other conditions. So, I mean, I personally think a trial like this should just be extended, and if it carries on with this type of response rate, it should be given rapid approval as standard treatment because the alternatives are not that good.
Well, listen, it'd be amazing. I hope they get on with it and roll on with it. Professor Angus Nuglish, thank you so much for joining me. He's a professor of oncology at St George's Hospital Medical School. Fabulous. Sounds amazing, doesn't it? You're watching me. This is GB News. More to come in the next hour.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
It's 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of those big topics hitting the headlines right now. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. It's 5:01. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Home Office has told the High Court another 2 asylum seekers will have their deportation to Rwanda cancelled. That brings the total to 5. Almost 100 legal challenges have been made against the government's policy, with lawyers arguing that Rwanda is not safe. A verdict is expected shortly. The Prime Minister says he still hopes the first flight will go ahead next week as planned. However, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer says it's the wrong approach.
The government's Rwanda scheme is a chaotic diversion, not thought through scheme which isn't going to solve the problems. Of course we don't want people making that dangerous crossing. Of course we want to clamp down on the people smugglers. The way to do that is to have a proper plan with the French authorities and a proper plan for upstream operations to intercept these groups before they even arrive on the north coast of France.
In breaking news, several people have been injured in a knife attack at a university in the city of Hamm in Germany. Local police confirmed that a suspect has now been detained. Now, this is a developing story, and we will bring you more as we get it. Meanwhile, the Labour leader has confirmed that his party will vote against the government's plan to override elements of the Northern Ireland Protocol when it's brought to the Commons on Monday. After meeting with political leaders in Northern Ireland, Sir Keir Starmer says he believes the deadlock over power sharing can be resolved through negotiation. The DUP is refusing to form an executive in protest against the protocol. Boris Johnson has ordered ministers to do everything in their power to secure the release of 2 British men sentenced to die in Ukraine's separatist region of Donetsk. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were found guilty of mercenary activities by a court there. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has described the verdict as a sham and raised it with her Ukrainian counterpart. Human rights campaigner Peter Tatchell told GB News the men are prisoners of war and should be given immunity under the Geneva Conventions.
There's no evidence that we've heard of that either of these men have committed any war crime. They have not killed civilians. They have not attacked civilian targets like hospitals or churches or other places, protected places under the Geneva Convention. So the charges have no substance. And it's very clear that Russia is using their case in a bid to put pressure on Western authorities.
The Defence Secretary has secretly visited President Zelensky to discuss sending further military support to Ukraine. The Ministry of Defence says Ben Wallace's unannounced trip to Kyiv is a show of continued support. Meanwhile, the mayor of Mariupol has warned that cholera and other diseases could kill thousands of people as bodies lie uncollected in the streets. 2 people have been jailed after a 10-year-old boy was mauled to death by an American bully dog called Beast. Jack Liss was attacked at a friend's house in Pentwyn, South Wales in November last year. 19-year-old Brandon Hayden has been jailed for 4.5 years after pleading guilty to owning the dog. 29-year-old Amy Salter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for being in charge of an out-of-control animal. A manhunt's underway after a teenager was stabbed to death at his home in Manchester. The mother of the 14-year-old boy was also treated for serious injuries and is now in a stable condition in hospital. Police have described the attack, which happened in Miles Platting, as ferocious. They're looking for an Asian man in his 40s who was known to the victims. They've warned the public not to approach him. Transport for London and First Group are expected to admit failings over the Croydon tram crash. 7 passengers died and 51 were injured when a tram derailed in South London in 2016. TfL and the tram owner are accused of health and safety failings that caused the incident. Transport for London says a guilty plea will enable court proceedings to, quote, come to a conclusion as promptly as possible. 14,000 new school places will be created as part of the government's Levelling Up plans. Up to 75 new free schools and sixth forms will open in 55 areas. The first is expected to open in September 2025. School Standards Minister Robin Walker told GB News supporting younger generations is a priority.
We need to be levelling up
across the country, and that's why I think the targeting of the support for schools that I'm announcing today is really important. We got these 55 education investment areas. We want to prioritise those for new schools, so that actually areas where perhaps children haven't had the opportunity to progress post 16 previously can have that gap filled. Have that opportunity to go as far as they can in their education and perhaps to go on to university, perhaps to take our new T levels so that they can have the best chances in the workplace.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more as we have it, including that developing story in Germany. For now, though, it's back to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. If you've just tuned in, where have you been? This is GB News. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is comedian Leo Kearse and also broadcaster and director of Car 26, Lois Perry. Still to come, in just a moment's time on Friday Focus, we'll be taking a look at media bias. Is the mainstream media's almost so-called hysterical anti-Boris obsession a bid to oust him, or is it fair reporting of facts? Some of Britain's most watched media has been accused of being overcritical of the Prime Minister. So what do you think? Have they? And the cost of filling up the average family car has reached a whopping £100, although not in my little Citroen C1. And there are warnings that the prices could still go up yet further. So in the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? What do you think? You can send your thoughts GBViews at gbnews.uk, or why not tweet me at GBnews. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but mainstream media organisations like the BBC and Sky are coming under fire over the coverage of Partygate and the no-confidence vote in Boris Johnson. Politicians and public figures have hit out at the broadcasters for fixating on the story and failing to be impartial. On Monday, Conservative MP Adam Holloway accused the BBC's Newsnight programme of making Boris look like Hannibal Lecter.
You admit the damage, though, to his reputation.
I think there's great damage to the reputation of politics, and I think it's also, at some point, it should do great damage to organisations like the BBC. I mean, this programme that I'm on now was showing pictures of him looking like Hannibal Lecter at the beginning.
Oh, come on.
OK, I can show you right here. Look at that. You've got razor blades. I mean, does that guy look like somebody who's been given a birthday cake, or someone who's just been locked up for something at the Old Bailey? I mean, this thing has been blown totally out of proportion.
And another Tory MP, Lee Anderson, took on a BBC journalist directly during an interview.
It's as simple as that. People don't look at the Prime Minister's character
of course
and think
they do.
he's a man who's lied to the Queen, lied to the House of Commons, lied to the public, and they don't trust him
what people
anymore.
see, Gita, is a witch hunt led by the BBC, led by the Labour Party and the mainstream.
It's the Conservative MPs who voted, not any of the media.
Had it in for Boris from day one. It's been a massive witch hunt. It's about time he got off his back. Let him crack on with running the country. Come back and talk to me in 2 years' time when he's delivered on his promises, and then we'll see where we are.
There is no witch hunt, I can assure you, from
there is a
BBC
witch hunt.
or any
my inbox is full of people complaining about the BBC all the time, saying it should be defunded. It's a massive witch hunt by you and the Labour Party and the mainstream media. You're on his case all the time. Even now, you're not going to let this drop, are you? You're going to go on and on and on.
Well, it's not about letting us drop, and it is not a witch hunt by anyone in the press. Our job is to ask questions of all politicians, which is what we do, regardless of party.
And I'm delighted to say that Lee Anderson joins me now. Lee, thank you so much for joining me. Do you know, when I watched that, I just gave you a round of applause, and I couldn't stop rewatching that clip again and again and again. I mean, seriously. Do you think that the mainstream media has been balanced in its coverage of Partygate and Boris Johnson?
Well, no, it's not, Nana, and I think, to be honest, I mean, I always like to speak in plain English. I think they've been quite vile towards Boris. I mean, that's okay. I mean, Boris and people like me will have our haters,
But it shouldn't be the media. It's the media's job to report the facts and let people make their own mind up. But what the media are doing, and what they've done for the last 2 or 3 years, is try and make people's minds up for them by just pushing out this nonsense day in, day out. You know, when you talk about Partygate, this goes further back than that. It goes back to Brexit. Now, they hate Brexit. They hate the fact that we've got an 80-seat majority. They hate Boris. They hate people like me. They hate our culture. They hate our traditions. They hate our way of life. They hate everything that's British at the moment. That's how it appears to me. I mean, look, especially the BBC. They used to be like anti-Beeb back in the 70s and 80s, and now they're just anti-Boris, anti-government, an anti-conservative party. So yes, they have been vile. Yes, they have been unfair, and it's about time that more people, more MPs, more politicians stood up and gave them a dose of their own medicine.
Because I'm wondering, what happened after that clip? Did they pretty much cut you off pretty sharpish and just, because they're not going to ask you any more questions there, would they?
Well, I'm going to be honest with you, because even when I do have battles with journalists and reporters, I like to do live TV, Dan, so they don't mess about with the clips, and because they bug us for that. You know, LBC and BBC have done that to me before. So what I did after the clip was done, because it was live, I said, thank you, well done. And you know what? They didn't want to know. They just turned their backs on me, and I thought, well, you know what? That must be 1-0 to Lee Anderson.
Well, it definitely wasn't. Apologies for any of the swearing there. I mean, some people don't like swearing, but I totally understand your passion on that. I mean, I see that, and I heard the way she questioned you. The question was a leading question, which obviously placed Boris in a scenario, and immediately she was expecting you to respond. And if you responded that way, you're almost in agreement with them, and you're answering on the back foot. My thoughts are, having heard it, do you think that if organisations like the BBC know that you're going to respond like that, they will shy away from asking you the questions? Because that's what I mean. They will then seem to have a lot of control.
Yeah, I think you're right, Nana. It's got your politics and it's got your journalism, should I say. Like you say, they ask a leading question. They're looking for a quick yes/no answer. Back in the day when interviewers used to do a good job to our media, they would ask a politician a question, give them 30 seconds, a minute to answer, then ask another question. But the mainstream media now, especially the BBC, they ask you a question and then interrupt almost immediately to try and trip you up. And that's not on. The viewers don't want to listen to that. They want answers from politicians. And, the lady on Monday never gave me a chance really to answer, but she was trying to talk over me. And I knew that was coming. I thought, you know what, this is my time to have a go back at the BBC. And I bet they don't ask me back on many more live programmes because they'll be getting the same again.
Well, that's the thing. But then, does that not give them a lot of power? Because if they then don't ask you back, they can just choose people who will say the nice things that they want to say and cut them off whenever they see fit. And that, when I think about that, I think of the danger of actually a state broadcaster. Because whilst I respect the BBC and I've had very good training from them, what I realise is the amount of power that they actually have.
But the good news is, Nana, we have up-and-coming media stations like the great GBNews that put out balanced opinions, and they give politicians of all parties a fair crack of the whip. And you know what? And I'm part of the campaign at work to defund the BBC. I want to see it stand on its own 2 feet, let people make their own minds up whether they pay for that rubbish. I don't pay for my TV licence. I don't watch the rubbish. I will go on freely and put my point across so millions of people out there can understand what people like me from the real world actually think. But you know what, like I said, the news, the media channels now are on your phone, they're instant. We can pick and choose who we go to for our information, and at the moment people are picking GB News.
Well, Lee Anderson is a great one to end there. It's lovely to talk to you. That's Lee Anderson. He's the MP for Ashfield. He's a Conservative. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you. Well, I'm also joined by Alice Enders. She's the Director of Research at Media Analysis and Research, Enders Analysis. Now, first of all, then, do you think that some of these media outlets, because they've been, even Tim Davie himself, that's the boss of the BBC, he even said that it has a left-wing bias. I'm pretty sure he said that. Do you think that some of them are actually being impartial, or do you think that a lot of the reporting is quite unfair?
Do you know, I think it's very legitimate that Lee Anderson, who is in favor of taking down the BBC, should castigate the BBC at every chance he gets. He made it very clear that his purpose is to take the BBC away from the people that pay for it, of which there are many in this country, and many people are very happy with the BBC. Now, if you look at the record of the BBC, the factual record, since the 2019 election, there have been only 2 complaints against the BBC for lacking accuracy and impartiality. 2 out of hundreds of complaints made against other broadcasters. The BBC has the best record in terms of the volume of content and so on that is produced in the UK and has for years, and in particular since the election of the Prime Minister. I understand that, there is, if you look at other media, for example, if you look at newspapers, they all reported, for example, the booing that went on at St. Paul's. So the idea that it's just TV news and the BBC in particular that is an issue is rather surprising. Lee Anderson accused the BBC of turning up the volume, when in fact, if you look at the clip, you will notice that what happened is that the booing started in one corner of the crowd and quickly spread. And that happens in football matches. I mean, it's just a crowd effect. So I think the track record of the BBC, and we have, Ofcom is the regulator. They look into all these complaints very carefully. And I would ask Mr. Anderson if he might not actually file a formal complaint rather than rely on opinion. I know that GBNews is about opinion, which is wonderful, but really, I think politicians should be a little bit more careful, evidence-based, perhaps, and in particular, this question of misunderstanding, I'm sure he's gone to football matches in Ashfield, the nature of the phenomenon. And I also think, if you think about Boris Johnson in particular and his portrayal, we know Mr. Johnson has had an issue with his weight up and down, and he has a trainer.
But if we come to the point though, because we're talking about the left-wing bias and the fact that it seems that...
So I do not think that Mr. Davey has ever said that. I think you say that. Mr. Anderson, who used to be a member of the Labour Party, seems to say that. I'm surprised. Maybe he knows something we don't.
That has been quoted and that has been said, and there are many things that they say there. But a lot of people are turning away from the BBC and Sky and a lot of those outlets because they do feel that there is a bias. And in that particular clip, I don't know whether you saw the clip, that question that was asked by the reporter was a very leading question, and that's one of the things that we're taught not to do. And it placed Boris Johnson in a scenario, and you are asking somebody with that consideration, and that is a leading question. So what Lee was saying was that he wanted them to be reporting things, but just reporting the facts and enabling the politicians to speak. And in that, he was also interrupted frequently every time he tried to answer. And anybody watching that could see that. And when you talk about complaints to the BBC, well, of course, they investigate their own complaints anyway. I mean, if you ever try to complain to the BBC, you'll probably find yourself in a loop.
I'm sorry, Ofcom is in charge of that.
Yeah, but the first stage, but the BBC do investigate their own complaints as well. Ofcom. So, but if you... But are you talking about complaints to Ofcom, or are you talking about complaints to the BBC? Because initially you said about...
The complaints about the broadcasting code go first to the BBC, and if the complainant is not happy, they go to Ofcom.
Yeah, that's right.
This is a fact. The Ofcom...
But you said there are only 2 complaints. I'm sure you said that at the beginning.
Yes, exactly. It goes to Ofcom.
So only 2 complaints to Ofcom?
Yes, since 2019, and none of them concerned the Prime Minister. One of them concerned Alex Salmond, and another concerned a program about Mr. Trump.
So can I just get this clear? You said that from 2019 there have only been 2 complaints to Ofcom
against the BBC.
Against the BBC. Okay, so I'll just read this to you. Figures show that in 2019, Ofcom received 221 broadcast standard complaints about BBC programmes. All but 1 were dismissed. Yeah? All but 1 were dismissed.
Excuse me,
Ofcom said in response to a Freedom of Information Act that these...
Excuse me, we're talking about fairness and accuracy, impartiality.
Well, exactly, but your comment wasn't accurate, was it?
You were talking about media bias, and I looked into the data this afternoon, specifically on the matter of impartiality, which is so important. And I agree with you that it was very unfortunate that the reporter and Mr. Anderson had not a very harmonious exchange. He's very angry. Obviously, it was not a good day for the Prime Minister to have 148
Well, I mean, I think that's a bit
MPs.
unfair to say that Lee was angry. He was quite clear. He was just direct with his thoughts. And actually, I think he was reiterating the thoughts of many people that the whole Partygate thing was going on and on and on and on, and that the broadcasters didn't appear to be able to let it lie. But Alice, look, it's really good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your thoughts. That's Alice Enders. She's the Director of Research at Enders Analysis. Right, well, I'm going to briefly throw to my panel, very briefly, because we've got to move on. But you heard what Alice said. She said there was only 2 complaints, and we found out there were 221.
And I've Googled, there's impartiality continues to be a complex challenge for the BBC, an Ofcom report says. So I don't know where Alice is pulling these figures from, but it's certainly not from the data.
Briefly, what are your thoughts?
They're not impartial at all. I've been booked on a number of times to go on, and then they find out a bit that I don't, agree with their views on climate change, and I get mysteriously dropped,
Well, but there could be other reasons, but that is your thoughts, and thank you for that.
Oh, no, I've been told it by one guy, actually.
Really? Oh.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I'll tell you what, we'll carry on with that. But coming up, it's been revealed that the cost of filling up the average family car has reached an enormous £100. So coming up, the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? That's all on the way after the break.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick.
Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's coming up to 25 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua, and it is now time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? Now, we're all aware of rising petrol costs. I mean, the pain at the pumps. I love it. In my little Citroen C1, I sit there and see if I've got the highest price pump next to me, because my car doesn't cost much, but I want to see how much the person before me paid, and I love that. When I see it over £100, I think, oh, dear. And then, thankfully, mine is about 50 quid, maybe, if I'm doing a £40 thing. But yesterday, it was revealed that the cost of filling up the average family car has actually reached £100. And that price could still, and probably will, go up. Now, that added to the cost of living, the crisis that we're having, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which has caused oil supplier fears and petrol retailers being accused of pocketing 4 pence of the government's 5 pence cut in fuel duty. And we're also looking at petrol price crisis. The Great British Debate this hour, I thought I'd better ask the question, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? Is it even possible? Well, let's have a chat to the Chief Economist at Cabinet Office under Gordon Brown. Who have we got here? Jonathan Portas. Jonathan, right, so talk to me. What do you think, then? A regulator for petrol prices. Is that a possibility?
Well, we do have a regulator for petrol prices, just as we have a regulator for how the supermarkets treat us and how lots of other industries work. It's called the Competition and Markets Authority. And so to the extent that there is actual profiteering, monopoly profits, fuel stations colluding to keep prices high, retailers actually ripping us off, that already exists. And they did look at this about 8 or 9 years ago in 2013, I think, and concluded that while there were some issues, on the whole, the market worked okay. That is to say, basically, prices are indeed driven by costs, by the global price of oil and so on. Now, it would be perfectly reasonable for the government to look at, for the regulator to look at it again. But my guess is that they'll probably come to broadly the same conclusion, that actually most, if not quite all, of these price increases are indeed driven by global forces.
So let me get this straight. This Competition Commission, though, don't they look at a competition on everything? So anything, not just particularly fuel. So they're quite busy, yes, aren't they? There's not one specific regulator that looks at fuel prices specifically, like you have Ofcom, like you have Ofwat, those people who specifically look at one particular industry. There isn't anybody who actually just looks at petrol prices.
That's correct. Now, the reason we have Ofgem, which does, as you say, look at electricity prices, is because that is a natural monopoly, right? You've only got one set of electric wires coming into your home. You need the market actually to be regulated. The view of the government is that, and successive governments is that petrol retailing is a reasonably competitive market. It's not a natural monopoly. You have lots of different retailers selling petrol. They ought to be competing with each other. If they're not competing with each other, then they're breaking competition law, and absolutely the regulator ought to crack down on them. But so far, at least, nobody's found a smoking gun.
Well, you're right, it's not a monopoly, it's more like a cartel, isn't it, really? I mean, what about then the government then? Because a lot of people are saying that perhaps they could reduce or cut the VAT on fuel, or is that the way forward? Would that make much difference to the prices?
It has to be said that fuel duty was, as you said, cut, and it probably had a marginal impact in reducing prices, but not much. I mean, yes, the government could cut fuel duty, and that would help to some extent. But of course, that has to compete with other pressures on tax and spending. Would we rather have that? Or, there are choices. The government also intends effectively to cut nurses and teachers' pay very substantially this summer by giving them way below inflation rate increases. So you have choices. Where do you want to spend your money? And those are legitimate political choices to argue about.
Jonathan, thank you so much. That's Jonathan Portas. He's a professor of economics at King's College London and former chief economist at the Cabinet Office under Gordon Brown. Great to talk to you. I'm also joined in the studio by the founder of Fair Fuel UK campaign, Howard Cox. You heard what he said. He said initially that there was somebody who does that, but there's not somebody specifically that does that. And I think that's a big difference. What's your view?
Well, you're absolutely right. We've got 37 million drivers in this country. They represent 85% of voters, and there's no consumer price protection for them. And little things like, for example, not so long ago, 2 weeks ago, the price or the wholesale price of diesel, that's the price that garages actually buying in their diesel stock, was 9p lower than petrol. Yet diesel on the pumps itself was 12p more. Go figure. Explain. All we want is honesty and transparency, and that's what we're not getting. He alluded to the investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority. It's called something else before. Now I forgot what it's called now. But I drove that particular inquiry. I pushed for that, and I got a lot of MPs to get it so that the Prime Minister at the time, which was David Cameron, we went for it. But it was a whitewash. They didn't interview the right people. They didn't at all. All they did was do the usual thing and said that there's competition going on. Yes, there is competition going on, but no one knows if it's fair or transparent. When oil goes up, and this is a big thing, this is a big worry, what will we be paying a week or two later? When it comes down by the same amount, is it going to come down by the same amount?
No, it never does.
It doesn't. Up like a rocket and down like a feather.
So because there's so many different companies that supply, petrol stations and so on, as he pointed out, it would be quite difficult? Would it be quite difficult to regulate? Because obviously there's global prices as well that you have to consider and other factors. Would it be possible to actually be regulated?
Well, that's what we're calling a body called Pump Watch. I co-wrote an article with Robert Halfon MP today in The Sun, and we are calling for a body for Pump Watch. We've been calling for about 4 or 5 years. But fundamentally, you said there's a lot of organisations involved, a lot of businesses down in the fuel supply chain. There aren't. There aren't many. And there's only 7 refineries.
Yeah.
If you take it, it comes from Saudi Arabia, it comes from the oil comes to the refinery, it's refined, it goes to a distributor, it goes down to a wholesaler, it goes to the retailer. It's a very simple process. What are the pricing process, isn't it? We want them all to make a decent profit. And can I say right here now that don't blame the retailers. Most of the retailers, the garage forecourt owners, are on very wafer-thin margins, and they've got tight contracts with wholesalers. They're almost held to ransom.
So out of, say it's £2 worth, because it will be £2 soon, how much would the government take of that, and where is it? If we were to break down £2 per litre, where does the money go?
Roughly £1 goes to the government.
Oh, really?
Roughly about
so
48%.
Almost half of it goes to the
yes. And the other half, all we're saying is, can you tell us, please, how is that price arrived at? Because we only get 18% of our diesel from Russia. We only get 8% of our oil from Russia. And one of the things I've always said that after the European Union, we came out of it, we talk about trade deals and all around the world. Why hasn't the trade minister gone to every single oil-producing country and say, can we do a deal with you to replace the Russian loss? And I'm afraid speculators is the other thing, the city speculators. Oil is a commodity and they gamble on it. And they love the volatility of the Ukrainian crisis, and that creates uncertainty, and they can put prices up.
It's like the futures market, isn't it?
Exactly right,
market
Nana.
where they do that. Yeah, but people would say that, well, actually, it's not controlled domestically, so that because it's controlled on a global scale, we don't have much power to affect the price. But as you said, 48% of that goes to the government. So why have the government not reduced their income from...
Yeah, just a little thing about the global control. So why is Poland 50p cheaper for diesel? Why is Spain 40p cheaper for diesel? It doesn't make any sense. And recently, we've got 3 asks of the government. One is cut fuel duty 20p, at least, because the 5p cut in the spring statement, we didn't notice it whatsoever. It wasn't passed on. You mentioned about a penny. I think that's about right, but it wasn't passed on completely. So they've actually profited in the fuel supply chain from a fuel duty cut. That's immoral.
It is immoral. But also, so I'm thinking we want this sort of regulator. Very briefly, because we're coming towards the news. Very briefly, how would that work? And
it's very difficult to actually say. We've got to sit down with the right people in the fuel supply chain to actually plan that. We want it to be run voluntarily, maybe a kite mark on every single garage forecourt next to the prices, which simply says we adhere to fair pricing.
Or maybe force people who want to sell their oil or fuel or whatever in this country to register with the body, otherwise they can't, or whatever, or something.
You've got it spot on, then.
Force them to do it, and if they don't, then we'd charge them a higher tax or something.
I'd vote for you.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. That's Howard Cox. He's the founder of Fair Fuel UK. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. On the way, our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel shortly. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Thanks, Nana. It's 5:35 p.m. I'm Ray Addison in the GB newsroom. The Home Office has told the High Court another 2 asylum seekers will have their deportation to Rwanda cancelled. That brings the total to 5. Almost 100 legal challenges have been made against the government's policy, with lawyers arguing that Rwanda is not safe. A verdict is expected very soon. The Prime Minister says he still hopes the first flight will go ahead next week as planned. The Labour leader has confirmed his party will vote against the government's plan to override elements of the Northern Ireland Protocol when it's brought to the Commons on Monday. After meeting with political leaders in Northern Ireland, Sir Keir Starmer said that new legislation is the wrong approach and the deadlock over power sharing can be resolved through negotiation. Boris Johnson has ordered ministers to do everything in their power to secure the release of 2 British men sentenced to death in Ukraine's separatist region of Donetsk. Aidan Aslin and Sean Pinner were found guilty of mercenary activities. And in a developing story, several people have been injured in a knife attack at a university in the city of Hamm in Germany. Local police have confirmed that a suspect has been detained. We'll bring you more on this as we get it. The Defence Secretary has secretly visited President Zelensky in Kyiv to discuss sending further military support to Ukraine and show continued support to the country. Meanwhile, the mayor of Mariupol has warned that cholera and other diseases could kill thousands of people as bodies lie uncollected. 2 people have been jailed after a 10-year-old boy was mauled to death by an American bully dog called Beast. Jack Liz was attacked at a friend's house in Pentwyn, South Wales in November last year. 19-year-old Brandon Hayden has been jailed for 4.5 years after pleading guilty to owning the dog. 29-year-old Amy Salter was sentenced to 3 years in prison for being in charge of an out-of-control animal. We're on TV, online and on DAB+ radio. This is GB News. We'll be back to Nana Akua in just a moment.
Direct.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV,
on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
we embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. We are the People's Channel. I'm Nana Akua. Now, before the break, we were talking about fuel and prices and whether you think we should have a regulator. Let's see what you've been saying so far. Darren says we don't need a regulator. This is a competitive market that finds its own level. What we need is a proper government intervention to remove the green taxes, and that until the price comes down to normal levels. The government just don't get how dangerous this situation is now. David says, when in the history of the prices have energy prices ever come down? When has anything ever come down? It never does it? Eric says, what's the point? Ofgem simply raised the cap. So if they're just going to do that, there is no point. Questions need to be asking, though, as 2008 prices per barrel were higher than now, but prices massively lower. What on earth is going on? Yes, a good question right now. Well, let's find out. It's our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? We're all aware of the rising prices at the pumps, and yesterday it was revealed that the cost of filling the average family car has now reached 100 squid. Yes, that's right. Added to that, the cost of living crisis, the invasion in Ukraine, all of that. And then we've got supply fears over petrol and retailers being accused of pocketing 4p of the government's 5p cut in fuel duty. So what do you think? It's a crisis. So for our Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? Let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by comedian Leo Kearse and also broadcaster and director of Car 26, Lois Perry. Right, Lois, you love your cars, Car 26. You're not into the green thing. What do you think?
No, I'm not into the green thing. And, you know, as Howard said, is it half, nearly half is tax, 48% is taxes. So that could be scrapped or could at least be reduced or could at least be a fixed price and not dependent on the fluctuating markets of prices of oil and things like that, because that's not really fair. Is it the government benefiting from stuff that's happened because of their rubbish net zero policies and all of that kind of stuff? But then I would say that, wouldn't I? But the interesting thing is, you know about prices not being passed on? One of the viewers said that the price was higher before, but the other price was lower to us. Yeah. It does make you think what's going on. And, you know, maybe the wholesalers, there's some kind of... Maybe there should be an investigation if there's some kind of illegal price fixing going on. Maybe a class action. I know that some people have been talking about doing that. You know, because the prices aren't being passed on at the pump, because it's not the actual garages that are making the extra money, it's the wholesalers, and it does seem. But then the biggest crooks are the government taking the green taxes and the VAT.
They're taking 48%.
Yeah, that's a lot of money.
That's like pretty much half.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think petrol has to be taxed. Petrol and diesel, it's fair that it's taxed. We've got to pay for hospitals and schools and drag queen story hour somehow. You know, this money...
And gender assignment.
All this money's got to come from somewhere, so we've got to do it. And I don't think having a regulator who goes into petrol companies and says, no, it's got to be £1.20 now. That's what they do in Venezuela and places like that. And all it does is it distorts the market, actually disincentivises any investment in bringing new sources online. What they need to do, instead of the windfall tax, instead of market manipulation and regulation and things like that, is to encourage investment in North Sea oil. Make us energy independent again. So we're making our own oil, our own petrol and our own diesel.
But failing that, because we're in it now, and that's, we could probably get on with that, but failing that right now, the huge prices of petrol, should there be somebody overseeing it? Because we've got the competition commission or whatever it is looking at if the competition isn't fair, but ultimately there are thousands of petrol stations and there is a lot of they deal with everything. It doesn't seem right, does it?
And there's only a few big energy companies, so I mean, if there is any sort of even if it's not an arranged and agreed market rigging, then there could be a subliminal, we'll wait and see if they put their prices
down. It's a bit like
down.
the banks, isn't it? There's a few of them and they all move together, don't they?
Or you have people like, for example, BP that have their own garages, but also they're wholesalers as well. If they were supplying fuel to, say, I don't know, Sainsbury's or Tesco or somewhere, they could say, we'll supply it, but only if you don't sell below what we're selling it for in our garages.
Well, exactly.
But, so that definitely does need to be looked into. But we need more investment into oil and gas, so that's the main thing.
Well, I'll tell you what, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice, your opportunity to be on the show. Tell us what you really think about the topics we're discussing. Which we head over to now? Oh, I love Bristol. Let's go over there. Let's go to Bristol. Let's have a chat with Lee Harris. He is a web designer. Lee, welcome to the Great British Voices. Now, Lee, talk to me. Good to see you. What do you think, then? Should there be a regulator for petrol prices?
I'm not sure we need a regulator. Listening to what I agreed with a lot of what Howard said. There's so much duty and VAT on fuel as it is now. You may as well ask the government to temporarily try to reduce those taxes to help people out during cost of living crisis. Now, I read a story earlier where care workers were calling in sick because they can't afford to fill their cars up, which is just no good. I think I totally agree with what Leo was saying. You absolutely need to tax fuel, but I think during this very unique time, I think it's probably wise of the government to just, fuel is a necessity. It's not as if this is money that's going to increase inflation. People are going to go out and spend more money in the shops. This is just a necessity. People are going to have to, pay for their fuel. It's just to get to work. It's to help people, live their normal lives. I think it's right for the government, I think, in a situation like this, to just temporarily give us a bit of a tax break. Just drop the tax on fuel a little bit. I think that would be the right thing to do, personally.
Yeah. Reduce their percentage. Lee, it's very good to talk to you. Thank you so much for your view and for joining the show. That is Lee Harris. He's a web designer, developer even. He's all out there in Bristol. So, yeah, I mean, he says temporarily we should reduce. But then you made a point, Leo. I mean, where are they going to get the money from, though? If they reduce that, then there's less tax take for them.
Yeah, I mean, what, are we going to have to make them spend less money on nonsensical government schemes? I mean, where would we be then? You know?
Well, why don't they actually just, bring energy prices down, and then, which they can do very, very easily, and then they won't have to do these stupid payments out to everybody.
Yeah.
It's just, taking from Paul, giving to Peter, whatever the thing is. It's just ridiculous. And
yeah.
putting everyone on benefits and in a benefit mindset, when actually there's things you can do to actually just make things easier and better and make people self-sufficient.
Make people self-sufficient, for goodness sake. Give a man a fish, he'll never fish properly. Right. Right. Or today I'm asking, should there be a regulator for petrol prices? Lots of you being in touch with your thoughts. Richard said, absolutely, it's criminal, these extortionate prices. Dave says, we do not need any of these regulators, which will create unnecessary high-paid, non-productive jobs funded by the taxpayer.
Here, here.
Well, yeah, that's a good point as well. We don't want them to be paid too much, do we? Right.
Unless I get one. If I get one of those jobs, then I'm all for it.
Net zero, head of net zero.
I should get that job.
Yeah, you'd love that.
Yeah, I'd love it, yeah.
Right, well, listen, we'll move on to this now, because this is an interesting one that caught my eye. Should all films and TV shows that show people smoking or other tobacco imagery be rated for people aged 18 or over? Now, those are the recommendations from a new report backed by Health Secretary Sajid Javid. The report also recommends smoking to be made illegal outside of pubs, bars, and children should be banned from ever being able to buy cigarettes. Let's see what my panel make of that. I've got Leo Kearse and Lois Perry joining me. I hear a little laugh from Lois and Leo. Lois and Leo, wow, the line, Lois and Leo. Leo, what do you think?
Well, it's a bit of a nonsense. I mean, there's smoking in so many shows that are for children. Look at Krusty the Clown in The Simpsons. And
Krusty the Clown in The Simpsons? That's sort of not aimed at kids, though, is it, really?
Yeah, but I mean, kids can watch it, kids can enjoy it.
No, that's
what,
true.
We're gonna only let, 45-years-olds watch The Simpsons? I mean, it's ridiculous. And also, the age of smoking has been raised to 21. So are we going to only let 21-year-olds?
Well, but you can join the army, but you can't smoke.
Kids have got access to the internet. They've seen ISIS burning people in cages. We can let them see people
That's awful.
smoking.
That's awful. Exactly. We don't want them to see that. We don't really let
what was that thing about Brunel? The kids were learning about Brunel at school, and they actually took the pipe out of his mouth. They airbrushed it because it would upset the children seeing him smoking a pipe.
Brunel?
Pardon?
Who, Brunel?
Yeah, Brunel, with photographs of him, obviously 100 years ago, or whatever, with the big hat. And they actually airbrushed out the black and white photographs in the kids' textbooks, him smoking a pipe. It's so ridiculous.
Oh, my goodness.
Actually, watching that's made me fancy a cig after.
You don't smoke, do you? No, it's a filthy habit. Do you smoke?
Maybe.
Oh, no, you've got to stop.
I do sometimes.
Listen, I used to smoke, and then somebody told me...
I have some vices,
No, somebody told me that if I smoke, I'll have lips like a bottom hole. From going... That was the end. That was the end. The next day, I gave up.
I'm never such a good girl. I've got to do some
I'm not having a mouth
stuff
like that.
Oh, yeah, no, I've been told that. My nan's told me that, actually.
And now do you smoke through your bumhole? Is that...
I don't smoke at all, actually. What do you think this is? Excuse that. Sorry, excuse that. If anyone's eating or anything like that, sorry. This is an afternoon show. And, Leo, you're not on headliners now.
No.
Yeah, honestly. Well, I asked what my panel makers, and I want to move on now, because let's go to my quick-fire debates, then. I think that's going to be a little bit safer. Right now, TikTok are planning to encourage teenagers to put down their phones if they use the platform for more than 100 minutes in a day. The company have unveiled new digital wellbeing tools for users that will prompt them to take a screen break from the app after extended single settings online and help them to take control of the overall amount of time they spend on the social media platform. So, Lois, do you think they've got the right idea?
I think it's completely disingenuous. And I just think it's, somebody told me, actually, that TikTok have got two different settings for the East and the West in terms that it's much more academic and educational, the settings that are for children in the Far East, than the ones over here are just moronic to make kids just thick and, just not think about anything academic. So I don't trust them at all. If they are doing that, great, but I don't. It's PR stunt.
What
probably.
do you think, Leah?
TikTok is a Chinese company controlled by the Chinese government,
Yeah.
and it's deliberately destabilising the West and introducing. They promote. As
Do you
Lois
think
said,
so? That's your view.
That's their
100%.
deliberate strategy.
Well, that's your view. That probably isn't their strategy. The strategy is probably to make a whole heap of cash.
No, but honestly, the Chinese Communist Party isn't as
about
cash
information.
as you might expect. It wants to destabilise the West. It's part of its misinformation drive.
Potentially,
So
yeah.
they feed all this, I mean, if you look at the stuff, look at libs of TikTok.
But would you? Okay.
The
So
stuff that gets
I won't let my
prioritised
little
on
girl try
TikTok-
it.
if something vibrates on your phone, say you've been on there for 100 minutes, come on, come off. You wouldn't, would you?
Well, I would if it was TikTok. It's rubbish.
My little girl wants to go on TikTok. I said that, her phone's literally going to take a bath if I ever see any social media on it whatsoever.
Really? How old's your daughter?
12.
Oh, my daughter's 13. She goes, I talk to her and she goes, and I talk to her, so what are you doing? I'll be telling her off. She goes, she goes, I'm doing a TikTok. And I'm like, I'm seriously having a discussion with her about something. And then it finishes with... at the end, it's awful. Right, let's move on. Finally, this is an awful story, actually. 2 Britons who were captured by Russian forces whilst fighting in Ukraine have been sentenced to death. State-owned Russia news agency RIA Novosti has said that Aidan Aslan and Sean Pinner have been accused of being mercenaries. Another Russian news agency said... so should we get involved in this one? Because this is, some people might argue that, they were fighting, even though they were following all the rules of engagement, apparently, and they have joint nationality, both Ukraine and British, so they didn't actually fly there specifically for the fight. But what do you think? Should we be getting involved in something like that?
Well, we're not technically supposed to be involved in the war, are we? So I'm not sure what the legal thing is there, whether, it comes under the Geneva Conventions and stuff. I'm not sure.
Well, I think it would be because they followed all the right rules of war. They
so
should
they're fighting for obviously for the Ukrainian army.
But they have dual nationality, both British and Ukrainian, so they're married to Ukrainians.
Yeah.
So they didn't just specifically go over
you
this.
You don't have to be a joint national to fight for Ukraine.
No, but I'm just telling you.
Without breaking international law. International rules around war and around combat allow people. Look at the French Foreign Legion, for example.
Yeah, but
so they're not breaking any laws.
But the reason why
but
the reason I'm asking is because they're British. They've got a British.
Yeah, but they're not breaking any laws.
No,
so Russia is completely idiotic to suggest killing them because remember, Ukraine has taken a lot of Russian prisoners of war. I think the UK should definitely be getting involved. We got involved to get Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe back from Iran, and look at the thanks we got for that.
Yeah, they'd probably be more grateful than her. You're right.
But we apologise for that because obviously, look, come on. But I hear you, and a lot of people think she's ungrateful. But actually, I wouldn't be that happy if I'd been incarcerated for all those years for some nonsense.
Maybe get mad at the people who incarcerate.
Yeah, I would. I would be annoyed. I would be annoyed at them. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah,
but you can't blame her for being a bit annoyed.
Getting back to these men, we should definitely be involved to save. I mean, the Russian government, if they kill these men, they are absolutely idiotic.
That's all very well.
We've got their.
But that's all very well. But how much do you think that Putin cares about that? I mean, look, he's literally flattened villages and swathes of land and taken people to concentration camps. I mean, from what I can see, it's genocide, and it doesn't seem that anybody's.
Probably used
it is
as a
genocide,
negotiation
frankly.
tactic.
So I don't think he's going to take any worry about being held for war crimes. Do you?
I don't think he's going to kill these men. I think they'll be covertly exchanged for some high-level prisoners that Ukraine has
or
got.
land.
Well, let's hope that they're safe and that doesn't happen. But
And fair play to them for
standing up against him, because a lot of people are scared. Right, well, listen, stay with us, because coming up next on GB News, it's Michelle Dewberry with Dubes & Co. Michelle, tell us what's happening on the show today.
Well, let's face it, Nana, who would not want a pay rise right now? But Boris Johnson has got involved and warned everyone who wants to ask their boss for a pay rise to be careful, because apparently if there's going to be a wage spiral, all it's going to achieve is higher and higher interest rates, which will make everything much worse. Would that put people off asking for a pay rise because Boris Johnson's told you not to? That's what I want to know. Also, COVID, hopefully it was a thing of the past, or at least getting to that point. But no, as of just a couple of days ago, Nana, there was an active job post advertising for a digital lead for the COVID pass. Sajid Javid had to explain that away. Suffice to say, that job ad is no longer valid. But what was going on there? I want to look into that. And Rwanda, we all know what the plan plan for that is. Apparently on Tuesday was the first flight planned, Nana, but at least 3 people that were supposed to be heading off to Rwanda will not be anymore because lawyers, of course, have got involved. So we'll be looking at all that and more in just a couple of minutes.
Wonderful. Sounds fascinating, Michelle. Thank you for that. Well, on today's show, we've been asking, should everyone have the right to own their own home? And according to our Twitter poll, it hasn't changed. 57% of you say yes, 43% of you say no. Well, interesting stuff. See, I'm with those who say no. I've got to say a big thank you to my fabulous panel. Leo Kearse, thank you very much for joining me. It's good to see you. We'll see you, next week? Or headliners probably tonight. Yeah. And we can't get rid of him. And Lois Perry, thank you so much for coming on board.
Thank you for having me.
It's always a pleasure. Love that red. I'm going to have that dress next time. You watch. Thank you also so much to you at home for joining me. It's fabulous to see you. I'll see you tomorrow at 4. Enjoy Jubes & Co next.
Hello again. It looks like the windy weather will continue through the rest of today and into the start of the weekend with further showers in the north, but the best of any sunny spells will remain across southern and some eastern parts of the UK. That's because low pressure driving our weather at the moment is towards the northwest, and the tightest isobars are affecting the far northwest of Scotland. That's where the strongest winds will remain. Risk of coastal gales for the Outer Hebrides, for some exposed parts of the rest of the Western Isles, as well as the West Highlands. Frequent showers continuing here overnight with some longer spells of rain for the northwest of Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland. 1 or 2 showers affecting northern and western parts of England as well, and Wales, but the further south and east you are, the drier and clearer it will be through the night. Where the winds manage to fall light in the far south, perhaps temperatures in the single figures first thing this weekend. 1 or 2 mist patches, they'll quickly disperse. And then, well, it's in the south and the east where we'll see the best of any bright and dry weather. Showers generally elsewhere.